The first national convention of the National Dialogue has ended in controversy rather than consensus. Legacy foundations, including the Thabo Mbeki Foundation, withdrew from the process days before it began, questioning its legitimacy and warning that it betrayed the citizen-led vision they had been championing. Critics now accuse the Mbeki Foundation of undermining the process or even plotting a parallel structure, while others argue that the event at UNISA was nothing more than a rushed, government-driven attempt to polish the ANC's image ahead of 2026. This morning, we welcome the Foundation's chairperson, Geraldine Fraser-Moleketi, and ask what went wrong from their perspective and what it means to reclaim this dialogue. Geraldine, good morning. Thank you for your time. As always, we really do appreciate it. I'm going to get into some of the details of the statement that you issued, which has a few exclamation points, by the way. I think I counted 4 or 5 or 6. I'm not sure now. But I wanted to just ask whether the former President Thabo Mbeki and yourselves and others in the foundation were watching the events live on television at UNISA this weekend.
Good morning, and good to be on your show this morning, Iman. I think the issue is not whether foundations watch the event or not. I believe that it's important to just state that our concern is not and has never been with the need for a national dialogue. We very clearly identified what the principles are by which it should be conducted, because we understand the complexity of a national dialogue. Looking at the event itself, the convention rather, considering the date, we were concerned that the date set was a bit too soon in terms of the preparatory work that was required for the national dialogue. And in that context, we said it couldn't really be called a national convention, because a national convention was to follow a pre-dialogue process. And this has happened in all instances where there were dialogues. I mean, in South Africa, if you want to go back to the Freedom Charter itself, 1995, there was a process that led to the culmination of the Charter. If you want to look at CODESA and CODESA processes, even in the talk about talks, there were positions that were prepared by all parties involved. And those attending were representatives of organizations and the pre-talks, it was political parties. If one looks at the African peer review mechanism process, there's a process that ensures the engagement of voices from communities and sectors, and also pre-papers. We are at a particular point, and I think we should move forward at this point.
Yeah.
And as a foundation, but I actually want us to deal with this as legacy foundations, because our position is not separate from the other foundations. Having been progenitors, I mean, we committed to a national dialogue with our understanding of the complexity of such a dialogue, and we will definitely engage with the national dialogue going forward. We are in quite a complex situation right now, in the sense that various differences came to the fore. We are aware that there were skeptics, and that's why the legacy foundations that said, just give it a little bit more time.
Yes.
Let's ensure that there are discussion documents that go out for engagement by sectors. And as you may be aware, there were 11 topics that were identified. And I mean, communities and sectors could have said at a gathering or even before that, listen, these topics don't cover the issues that impact on us every day. These papers that we are engaging with isn't encompassing enough. And I think the representatives attending from all organizations, sectors,
Yeah.
sections of society would actually come and say the position of our organization, our sector, our community, our ward is as follows. So I think this is not about staring down anyone. It's ensuring the integrity of the process, the inclusiveness of the process, and ensuring that it is citizen-led,
Yeah.
whilst understanding the role of government within it.
I want to go back to what you say in the statement. With due respect for those attending the meeting at UNISA, these individuals will have no possibility whatsoever to claim to represent any of the constituencies that you referred to now and previously. So my first question wasn't about Schadenfreude necessarily, but in watching the way things unfold, whether, you know, your stance is, we told you so.
I don't think that's helpful in any way whatsoever. And I think we need to look ahead and see how best to ensure an inclusive national dialogue.
So given that then, because yourselves and the legacy foundations say that there will be a reclamation of the process. So in practical terms, Geraldine, what does that look like? You have said that you will engage going forward. So we just want to understand the modalities of that. Will you be restarting it under a new framework, or are you going to re-engage with the organizers despite what seems to be already some mistrust?
You know, national dialogues lend itself to complexity, and I want to repeat this. It's probably the third time I've said that. And you bring everyone around the table. If you look at national dialogues elsewhere in the world or the continent, it is not a space where you engage with like-minded. You bring those who have different opinions. And I think what must be invested in at this point is how do we bring everyone back and around the table. As I said earlier, as progenitors of the process, we will not withdraw from the national dialogue. What we withdrew from was the National Convention. Let's ensure that everyone comes on board, and we need to look at what that process of bringing everyone together will look like.
What ideas do you have in that regard, given that there do seem to be some schisms? We were there on Friday. I was there on Friday. For example, if you look at the Khoi and San representatives, some people felt that they were excluded from the conversation, that it was there that they needed to make themselves seen and heard. We saw another grouping under the Khoi and San community, for example, protesting outside on the street. So this idea of who represents whom, and I think it's something you've also talked about in your statements, for example, when it comes to the 30-plus constituencies and sectors invited to attend the first national convention, you know, that there was meant to be a certain quota of people selected from different groupings to ensure that the process would be fully representative going forward.
So, you know, there's going to be a need for a mechanism that will ensure true inclusivity in order that we avoid the kind of scenario that you've just sketched or the reality that you were exposed to. The second issue is also probably to revisit the coordination structure in order to oversee a successful discourse, and then to review and set up a clear agenda that will enable and empower citizens to engage with the dialogue process. And here, I'm sure there's some thinking that are coming from members of the EPG. I'm sure there are engagements from their side, and we open to take that, to consider that. I think there's also going to be a need to review and tighten the criteria of involvement in the national dialogue coordination structures in order to avoid the problems that we've seen to date.
One of the observations that were made, Geraldine, and what we heard people say, and you would have heard this as well in the criticism about the need for a national dialogue in the first place, that South Africa is potentially one of the most well-researched countries, all of these NGOs with different information, the demographics they represent, including in deep rural South Africa, that we have all of the information that a national dialogue would want to canvass about the state of South Africa in this moment and what citizens need, that there isn't a need for this process going forward. So that's on the one side. But the other is, say South Africans buy into this bargain and say, okay, for the last time then, all right, you want to know how we feel? This is how we feel. That we're setting ourselves up for some risk if after this process, which, as you've already said, is complicated and sort of multifaceted, doesn't deliver the promise of what the national dialogue is intending to deliver, that South Africans will become even more alienated from the people that lead them and potentially even more disengaged from the democratic project in South Africa.
So just a couple of issues on that. I think firstly, when you look at the issue of public trust and the lack of public trust, that's not only a South African phenomena, it's a global phenomena where you see alienation between political representatives and citizens, the masses of our country. The intention of the national dialogue was to use this as an opportunity for a great reset. So yes, there is a lot of research that's been done and so on, but these were based on various samples and a particular methodology. The point of the dialogue is actually saying, let's go out there. Let's go out with those papers. Let's reach every person, whether it's a miner, a farm worker, whether it's people in factories and elsewhere, and say, are the demands you are making, are they captured? You'd also bear in mind that there has been a mechanism put in place to have an interministerial committee that would deal upfront with some of the immediate challenges. Now, you and I may say, but we can see this. So the issue is, how do we ensure another layer or a different layer of accountability directly to citizenry to ensure that some of the challenges are unblocked? And will there be cynicism at the end? I think ours is to say, this is your opportunity to raise your voice, to make a difference, and also ensure that you hold those who should implement it accountable in a different way. Again, we've seen this in places elsewhere on the continent, elsewhere in the globe, and it's not smooth, but we've got to make an effort and ensure that we get involved in this reset to take things forward and ensure that we really live up to we the people in our constitution.
It's important, Geraldine, because every morning on this program we read the headlines, just the misery that South Africans face, the social contract in many places that has just been broken, people living with, for example, service delivery issues, not for a year or 2 years, but decades even in some instances. I want to leave that for the moment, and I appreciate, the tone that you set at the very beginning of wanting to take the high road. But relationships and the way that they converge, Geraldine, are complicated. On Friday, in response to former President Mbeki's absence, Gwede Mantashe, the ANC's Gwede Mantashe, asserted that one of the things important in leadership is knowing when to let go when there is a new leader, implicitly calling on former President Mbeki to step back. Was there a response from Mr. Mbeki? Did he respond? If he hasn't, how do you interpret that statement?
There's no need for a response to such a statement because President Mbeki didn't withdraw from the dialogue as an individual. He simply responded to an invitation that came to him. The national foundations took a position based on principle, and I think we must stop personalizing politics. I think it's rather unfortunate that it's seen as a spat, because this is not a spat. This is not a show. This is about building national cohesion and national consensus. Let's take the individuals out of it. Let's look at our people and what's required for, by, and with the people of South Africa.
Thabo Mbeki Foundation chairperson Geraldine Fraser-Moleketi, thanks again for waking up early with us, Geraldine. We appreciate